this a good spot for the podium, or do you need the
Do you
podium?
have a microphone stand? Okay.
That's okay. Or you could probably leave it like that.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. And oh my goodness, I wept during the last presentation. The power and the resolve that it takes to mount a movement, right? Is what you're trying to do, is incredible. And it is also part of our rich Asian American history. There have been so many people who have seen injustices as Asian Americans and who've stepped forward and put the fight in their name. And you put the fight in your name, and I think that is an incredibly inspiring moment. And I hope you'll stay, because I would love to know all the ways that we can support you and that we can add to your movement. So I'm Sally Matsuishi. You have to excuse the fact that I'm losing my voice. I have a cold. But I am here, and you stayed to the bitter end, and I appreciate the fact that you did. What I'm going to talk about today is about the new law that was put into place to put Asian American studies and ethnic studies into law in the state of California, which is a big deal. It's a huge deal, and hopefully it'll spread across the nation. It was put into place by Tony Thurmond, who's the head of public education for the state of California, Gavin Newsom, and a ton of people of color, BIPOC people who demanded it, who lobbied it, who wrote for it. And so here I wanted to just sort of outlaw what the law says, okay? So it was passed in 2021, and it says that all high schools must begin to offer ethnic studies courses in the year 2025 to the 2026 school year, which will mean that students in the class of 2030 will be the first one that will have this graduation requirement. Ethnic studies as a graduation requirement is a big deal. And let me explain why. Who here went to school and saw the only part of your history in the history book, like your American history book, be in a little box in the corner? I remember it was like, there was a little thing, and that we lived for the little thing. I remember I went home and I showed my dad the little box, right? And we were so proud that we were in the little box, which reflected that we had never been told that our history was important. We had never been told that we had a history. For South Asians, Southeast Asians, and Asian Pacific Islanders, their history didn't even get a little box. Right? There was no place where we were. What does that mean to a young person? To have no representation whatsoever. To not know your own history. To not know that Asian Americans were here before America was America. That they were galleons of enslaved people and indentured servants that were Filipino, that came to Morros Bay in California, and were here before the inception of the idea of America. We were here. We start in wars that created the United States as we know it today. Not the ones later on that ended up in the little box. The 442nd Japanese Americans, the most decorated battalion in American military history, was in World War II. But we were also here way, way, way before that. And we were fighting for the establishment of the United States in 1812. But that wasn't in the little box. Nor was the Sikh community here in California that helped establish key agricultural states, or the Chinese Americans, the Southeast Asians who worked within the state of California that made it the 7th largest economy in the world. What happens in California is seen as a tipping point of change. Oftentimes we've been on the right side of history. So when it came to be that we needed to create an Asian American Studies curriculum for Marin County, I got a call, mostly because I'm a nerd. And I've been a teacher for a very long time, and I've been working in ethnic studies for a very long time. But then comes, okay, blank sheet of paper, what goes on it? Huge fights ensue, right? Because in the state of California, we have incredibly left-leaning counties and incredibly right-leaning counties. There were some questions about whether or not to include Asian American history because of the loyalty question, right? Were we going to talk about certain groups of people and how are we going to talk about them? And also the idea of, should we talk about them at all? Because is this critical race studies, right? Which, by the way, became a sort of a right-wing dog whistle, right? To sort of taint the idea of ethnic studies. But who should be included? Who should not be included? How much should be included? Should it be just heroes and holidays? Is it enough to just have language study? Like if we teach Mandarin language, are we good? When we start talking about Asian Americans, do we talk only about our great successes? Does that only lend to our idea of the model minority? How do we start being a part of the larger conversation about the history of this country? How do we talk about poverty? How do we talk about access to voting? How do we talk about housing? How do we talk about how the difference between immigrants and refugees and the waves of immigration? Whose story gets told? Okay, so me being the nerd, I was all excited for this fight. I was down for it. Who were we going to talk about? I started going and talking to different communities. What history is important to you? What is history? Is oral history important? Is it dates and figures? Is it our presence in larger movements? Asian Americans played a huge part in the American Civil Rights Movement. We don't hear a lot about that, but we were there. We organized when we talk about UC Berkeley, right? And we talk about the free speech movement, and we talk about the rise of ethnic studies, the Third World Liberation movement here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Asian Americans played a huge role in that. But you don't see them. Every now and then you'll see a picture of my mom in a thing, and I get to say, that's my mom. But other than that, her story hasn't been told. The story of how redress was born for the Japanese American incarceration was born out of two activists that were here in Marin County, and how they sat around a dining room table one night and decided they were going to take on the American government. And that turned into redress, which now is serving as conversations around reparations for enslavement. We need to talk about all of the Asian American presence within the justice system, how the early conversations about who is a citizen, what is race in this country came out of the Asian American communities. Once our young people learn these very rich histories, then the questions about our loyalty, about whether or not we brought a disease, whether or not we deserve to have housing rights or voting rights, or whether or not we vote as blocked, or all of who gets to be in our government. All of those questions, if we start with in schools, begin to melt away. It's my hope. My hope is that when these histories, and every single person, not just Asian Americans, right, but an entire class, you will not be able to graduate high school in 2030 without taking ethnic studies in the state of California. You will learn our histories in this country, not just in little gray boxes in the corner that somebody in Texas decided to include, but based on what we decided, what we thought was important, and the weaving of those histories together, I believe will have the power to make it so there will never be the question of loyalty. If you know about the Manila Men, if you know about the fact that we were here in the war in 1812, that we served in the United States military on every single major conflict in the history of this country, that we built both urban areas and suburban areas, that we are responsible for both the tech boom and the agricultural boom across this nation, that we have elected officials in all areas across this nation, not just in the ones that you think we're in. When it comes down to the question of what you were talking about, people actually believed that when you were sitting there as an American citizen, that they were protecting you from the challenges to your loyalty. That's a disgusting thought. But it wouldn't be one, I believe, if all of us learned the history of how much Asian Americans are rooted in this country and are rooted in our success, are rooted in our struggle, that their struggle has been shared, and that we have been here since before the United States was the United States. So when I started working on this curriculum and I started writing and I started talking to communities and we started building it out, it became larger and larger. And also, what the wonderful thing is it started building community with the African American community and the Latinx community and the indigenous community. 2 weeks ago, I was in New York City. There is a foundation called the Wallace Foundation that wants to invest $100 million in marginalized communities, particularly in the study of ethnic studies and getting stories told. One of the things that I loved about being in that meeting is next to me was Daphne Little Deer, who is from the Indigenous Plains community, and on the other side was the Urban League, one of the largest and oldest African American social justice institutions in this country. And together we're sitting at the table and discussing how we're going to build this out, not just in California, but in the states that don't want it. Because regardless of the fact of whether or not it's a blue state or a red state, there are Asian Americans in those states. There are African Americans in those states. There's Latinx people in those states. There are indigenous people in those states. And they need their stories to be told. So as I work nationally, and because I've started building out this curriculum, currently the curriculum that I'm working on is in 10,000 schools across the nation. And when we were tasked with how do we dismantle anti-Asian hate, you have to imagine it was bad here in California, right? There was an elder killed in San Francisco, right? Risha was killed, 20 minutes from here? And countless numbers of Asian elders, and non-elders too, by the way. I got yelled at in the street, right? All of the children that were in those schools, all of the children who were being bullied at school, all of the children who had to sit around the table and hear that talk. And I'm sure many of you had that talk with your family and your elders of the times are different now. We have to be careful when we go outside. One of my nephews bought me a keychain that if you pull it, it sounds an alarm. Which it was very sweet. And then I was like, I'm not that old, I can run. But anyway, he gave me this thing, and we all had those conversations. I just sit down with my parents and have the conversation. It's a different world. You have to be careful when you go outside. Be aware of what's going on. There were kids who reported to us across the country when I went out and worked with school districts, that then while they're in school, they're worried about what happens to their grandparents. They're worried about the fact that their mom's on the bus. This was on top of pandemic. This was on top of being bullied at school. They had these fears. So as we build out these curriculums and we put this out in the world, yes, we're teaching the history. Yes, we're dismantling discrimination. But what's more important is I want to be in that space with that kid who's trying to study in school, but in the back of their mind is worried about their mom taking the bus home from work. This is where this work can be powerful as well. It is not just in the study of the history. It's not just in the politics of it all. I think the most powerful part about the work that I've done across this nation around this has been those children. Going out to the Bronx and talking to a half-black, half-Chinese little girl who said, I worry about my mama. She walks home. I worry about her. What can I do to help her? And having the conversation, first of all, what a wonderful, beautiful child this is, right? To explain to her the origins of where anti-Asian hate comes from, that it's not new, it's not happening just to her, but it's a part of a history. And a part of that history is also the activism that came after it. about how there's a loving community of Asian Americans across the nation who are building things and putting them into her schools to protect her. How their community groups are going to work together to mobilize, to support her. To be able to tell a child that yes, this is happening to you. First of all, to acknowledge that it's happening, right? Because there are a lot of schools that were like, oh, it's just bullying. It happens to everybody. And for us to be able to go and say, no, this is different, right? But to go in and be there for that child and to have those things put into place in those schools and to give the tools to those communities to support them. It is my goal, and the goal of so many others, it's not just me, to make that change, to change that trajectory, the way that we have always done in this country. The way Asian Americans have always mobilized, how Asian Americans have had meetings like this, who are Asian Americans who stayed late in a hot room on a Saturday afternoon to hear an idea. Because this is the way that we make change. And this is the way that a little girl in the Bronx felt safe that afternoon. So, that is my presentation. And I hope that you will join me and others in this fight. There's a fight to be had. We're fighting it every day. So I hope you'll come to me after this program and I can let you know how I have many jobs for you to engage and to continue this fight. Thank you very much.
Did anyone have any questions I forgot to ask them? No?
Well, we usually teach the children's history of the all different ways when they're young, not high school only, but I really teach them when they're elementary school, junior high, and high school, please, because not, African American history and Hispanic history and Asian history, really start them young, really. That way, the races will go away, I hope.
John, I always love how you bring up the good stuff. Yes, I'm starting with high school, but I'm trickling down. I'm thinking of it all, and I'm working with others. The Wallace Foundation wants to start as early as pre-K.
Yeah.
So hopefully they will put their people have $100 million towards creating a fully sequenced ethnic studies curriculum.
Yeah, art and everything, that way it's easier.
Yeah, I had a question.
Sure.
When will ethnic studies become just like American history?
The question, that's the big question. That's an excellent question. Will it always be separate? You're asking like,
Yeah, it
right,
should be
so
separate.
like you have African American literature, should it just be American literature? This is a conversation that we're having a lot. And
Good.
my secret heart is that you're right. It should just be all American history, that all American history would be equitable and we could have representation through all of it.
Right.
The question is how fast can we get there? So people believe, and people, I mean the people at UC Berkeley and Stanford who put a lot of, and Columbia's Teachers College, who put a lot of research into it, that we'll take this step first, make it law, and then we'll take the next one. And I don't know.
Wow.
I'm not sure whether or not that's the right thing to do, but I do believe that this law is powerful and that we will take the steps because we're Asian. We will stay on to the bitter end, man. We will take each one of these steps and fight in each one of the ways. My grandfather fought in the internment camp at Post in Arizona, and my daughter fights the same fight as well. So it's a multi-generational fight that I am honored to be a part of, but that's the big question. Will we ever be American history? I wish I had that.
But that's okay, don't worry about it. But I'm very inspired by you, and I actually am inspired by everybody here. Just being in this room is kind of a rarity for me.
Yeah, so we're thinking if we could...
I'm like in the art crowd in San Francisco, so I don't get a chance to...
I can't stand this thing.
Hello?
Yeah, I can't.
Now okay.
I can't. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we're thinking
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah, go
put
ahead.
chairs down there.
He asked, would we ever be a part of American history, or will we always be
Ethnic
ethnic
studies
history?
should be changed to American
I
history.
know, but you had some other comments that we should speak up front, some of us in the back.
Sorry,
So I heard
my
that, that's
bad.
okay.
Sorry.
But I think we're also gonna ask, Sally, to have the other two speakers join you. Because, you know,
Because I have a question.
okay, in creating this, some of this just sort of fell into place. And what I've been really proud of is that we have 3 speakers coming from different fields, from education, from art, from the state of Department of Arts, Michael. And yet there's this theme that runs throughout the work that you guys have done. You know, history, discrimination, the need to instill our next generation, because the fight goes on, the fight